Hi everyone. I just wanted to take a second to talk about your annotated bibliographies. I'm in the middle of going over the ones that were submitted on time, and it looks like people are doing a lot of great research. You've done a lot of great reading. I think there is some confusion on a few things, though, that I want to clarify before your first drafts come in and then before you do your revisions for the portfolio that will be due at the end of the week. The main thing with the annotated bibliography is that there's both form and there's content. So I'm going to talk about both. First, I want to talk about content. For the content in the annotated bibliography, you need to make sure that you have the required types of sources. And in order to do that, you have to be clear on what each of those types of sources really mean. So you need to have 4 scholarly sources, 1 popular reliable source, and 3 primary sources. You can have more than that in your actual paper, but the only thing, that's required in the annotated bibliography are those 8. Now, primary sources are sources that are both written by the person, so it's in the first person, but they're also about that person. So like a diary, a blog, someone takes a photograph, song lyrics, they're like first-hand documents. But if someone is collecting information about a group of people, even if they say, I saw this, they are writing from a secondary position. So those are not primary sources. Researchers are human beings. They exist. They have to, say, I did research. Sometimes that's how they'll phrase things. That doesn't mean it's a primary source, though, if they are collecting data, if they refer to other secondary sources, if they're contextualizing, if they're making an argument. But if it's somebody saying, I took a walk today, the sky was pretty, I petted a dog, that's primary. If someone is talking about their experience going to a Comic-Con, I went to this Comic-Con, I dressed up as this, I saw these people, it was a weird thing, that's primary. But if it's a researcher saying, I interviewed these people, I noticed these patterns, I read these other things, those are going to be secondary sources. So you need to be clear on primary versus secondary, first of all. Then, so you have your primary sources there. So your own observations that you did going out, I'm counting those as primary because you have not yet interpreted that data. Really, once it goes to secondary, that's because the information, you start to interpret it. So it's not like raw information that's just there for people to make up their own minds about. Primary is really kind of like trying to get at unfiltered information. So once you've distinguished between primary and secondary, you then need to think, okay, so what's the difference between scholarly and popular within that secondary context? Now, there's a lot of things that can be secondary popular, There's some things that are real crappy, really unreliable. And then there's some stuff that's super reliable, but not yet at the level of scholarly. So the popular category is big. The scholarly category is small. In order to be scholarly, it has to come from a peer-reviewed journal. So that's not just something appearing on the University of Oklahoma website, not just appearing on, the Society for People Who Like Chicken, or whatever it is. To be scholarly, it has to be peer-reviewed, which is a very specific process, not just edited. It has to go through the peer review process where other experts in the field evaluate the information and then say, yes, this is credible, reliable information. So those almost always are scholarly journals. And those scholarly journals are the peer-reviewed journals that you can access through TCC's library website when you go into, there's a number of search functions, a number of journals, but most of the time you can filter your search results down to just peer-reviewed items. And that is a useful filter. It doesn't weed out everything that's crappy, but it does filter things down in general to what would be a scholarly source. And so I've noticed on some of your annotated bibliographies, some folks found some really good information. It looks really solid, but I don't think they're in peer-reviewed journals. And you do need 4 of those because those are the highest level of scrutiny. And I think this is a particularly important thing to be thinking about now when, broadly speaking, our society is in the middle of a debate about what counts as science and what counts as reliable information and what counts as reliable data. And scholarly sources are the most reviewed and reliable type of information. That does not mean they are without error. It does not mean that they wouldn't be evaluated in the future and that data could change. And it doesn't mean they're not even, subject to the pressures of society. But what that does mean is that multiple experts have looked at them. And so they have a higher degree of credibility. And what we have to be able to do is evaluate information rather than just saying something is 0% correct or 100% correct. And what correct even means there, is up for discussion. We have to be able to weigh and evaluate information against other sources. And one of the mechanisms by which we can do that is to evaluate and reflect on and to take seriously expertise. People who have studied things for decades, you don't got to take what they say just, without thinking about it, but you should give it more credence than people who have not studied something at all. It's like saying, imagine you're going to a football game, playing football. Now, I could potentially come up with a strategy for how to do a good play in football. I'd say, well, why don't you guys just do this? And then there's a coach over there who's been coaching for 30 years, and he's like, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we should do something else. Now, I could be right. Like within the realm of possibility, maybe the thing I suggested could just happen to work. It's not impossible, but it is less likely. And I think most people would take my opinion less seriously than they would the coach who's been coaching for 30 years, as they should. It doesn't mean 100% he's correct, I'm 100% wrong. All it means is you would give more weight to the 30-year-old coach than the 0-year-old coach. And that's what we're talking about. You have to be able to evaluate and weigh information depending on where it's coming from. So that's the goal of the annotated bibliography, is to lay out and to demonstrate both the credibility of your own paper, but to demonstrate to me that you understand those different levels of credibility. So I'll keep giving feedback on the annotated bibliographies. Please keep in mind, I might not point out every single time I see an issue. So if you cite something incorrectly and I say, oh, you need to italicize journals, I would expect you to go through and make sure throughout your document that you have italicized all the journals, even if I don't mention it every single time. Okay, sorry if this is super wobbly. I'm just doing this on my phone because I wanted to get this out pretty quickly. It's my bookshelves, my nieces. But please look over those comments and then let me know if I can help with your papers. It gets a lot easier to help specifically with the drafts of your papers once we have drafts in. So really, really plan on just trying to get a full draft in tomorrow so you can be in a peer review group. Even if it's not very good, even if you don't have all your sources, get something posted, please. And reach out if I can help. All right, thanks, bye.